Leon Kester works for TNO, and he is an AI safety and ethics scientist, expert, so to say, and involved with high-ranking research in this field. And I'm very honored that he is here today. And I would say the floor is yours.
Yes. Okay. So my talk is indeed in English, and it is about moral behavior of advanced artificial agents. And it's already in the previous discussions, there was some discussions about value-based design, actually how to design morality. And I will already warn you this in the international context of advanced artificial agents, the discussions is slightly different. And but I will come to that. First, I will say something about what we call internationally AI governance strategies. So how to deal actually with artificial intelligence, how to control it, how it can be value aligned, and how we can have good moral behavior of advanced artificial intelligence. I will then introduce something about what we call an ethical goal functions. This is about what we should want. And then I will introduce what we call augmented utilitarianism. It's a new moral framework, actually, which not only looks at the philosophical views, but also at the neuroscientific views, moral psychology, and how to extend reality for humans such that they understand better what actually they should want. And also, in the end, something about safety, which is very much related to ethics, because, of course, we want also that this artificial intelligence behaves in a safe way, for example, for autonomous vehicles. And finally, I'll tell something about what we call the social technological feedback loop, is how this advanced artificial intelligence can actually be introduced in society, how we can make it such that we, as a society, have control over this artificial intelligence, including data and all kind of data management, and how to deal with all kind of privacy issues and all these kind of things. So first, governance strategies. There are basically 4 different types of strategies. We can prohibit certain type of applications or intelligence. We can ask the different companies to self-regulate. We can have what we call a deontological approach, in which we simply say, these are the rules, and this, like Asimov, you can think of, maybe heard of Asimov rules. Okay, this is what we should do. And finally, what we call a utility-based approach. What is very important, I think, in the discussions, particularly about moral design of artificial intelligence, that there was somebody called Nick Bostrom. He wrote a book. He's at Oxford. He wrote a book about superintelligence, and he actually stated that in the discussions about artificial intelligence, we should really understand that the goal of this type of systems is actually orthogonal to the intelligence itself. So basically, when we talk about the design of an artificial intelligence, we should separate actually the intelligence from the goal of this. So there are 2 design issues. There's the design of the artificial intelligence, and there's the design of the goal of this artificial intelligence. And they should be completely separated. And this is very important, because it's not so it is clear that the design of the artificial intelligence itself is up to the developer of this artificial intelligence. But it's very important that we can separate it, because the design of the goal, it should not necessarily, and I think preferably, not be up to the designer of the artificial intelligence. And this is very important. So the prohibitive strategies from this perspective, you can prohibit artificial intelligence, you can prohibit certain type of applications, but you really have to think about what type of goals do we forbid. And when you go deep into that, that is very difficult. For example, for autonomous weapon systems, what actually are we trying to forbid here? So there cannot even be a prohibitive approach, because nobody understands really what then should be prohibited. A self-regulated approach, we already heard about it. That is quite dangerous, because it's not necessarily that all kind of developers of companies or all kind of interest parties have the same goals in mind as the society. So this is also a tricky one. Deontological is already better. You can have rules, and we can have, okay, as a society decide about, okay, this is the good behavior and this is not good behavior of artificial intelligence. The problem of the deontological approach is that you cannot actually design time specify what these kind of rules are. The real world is way too complex to really state that in a few rules. And that already Asimov know. I mean, a lot of people say Asimov actually designed those rules to show that it was not possible to actually define good behavior of an artificial intelligence or robot. So finally, we are stuck to what we call a utility-based approach. This is basically the only approach. Well, I will try to explain why that is the only approach even to get a kind of consistent approach to AI governance. So what is things we should then think about if we talk about ethical goal functions? So they must reflect moral pluralism. And what a lot of people in AI do is classical utilitarianism, and that's clearly inefficient. There are a lot of publications about that it doesn't work. Formulation of value should be done from the first-person perspective. It's not a philosophical, professor-like problem. No, it is the society itself, which somehow should formulate that. We should have to capture this kind of what actually society wants in some kind of a mathematical form. And it cannot be inferred from the behavior of people. There's also a lot of approaches in which they think, you can learn it from behavior. Cannot be done. And we need a transdisciplinary approach, not only a philosophical view, but also a neuroscientific view and a psychological view to craft these ethical goal functions. And the first-person perspective should be augmented with virtual experience, because there's also known that people, when they project the future, are not very well in predicting the future or their future well-being. So that should be more visualized for them, how that actually is and how this future actually looks like. So first, the philosophical view. We can have people look actually at a scene. They look at an agent who does a certain act, and that act has certain consequences in the environment. So a virtue ethics approach would actually have a focus on the agent. They would say, the agent should be ethical. And the people who see the scene, they look at the agent and say, okay, this is ethics and this is not ethics. The ontological ethics, Kantian also called, it is looking more at the action. So it says, okay, this type of actions are okay and this type of actions are not okay. And that's kind of absolute view only on the actions. And then there's the consequentialist ethics. They look at the consequences. And an augmented utilitarian approach would then say, well, we have to look at all those perspectives at the same time, because all these perspectives, it's not that all these views are there in philosophy. Well, that's not by accident, of course, because they're all important. So somehow we should be able to integrate all these type of different views from the philosophical perspective. But there's more, because there's also a neuroscientific view. So if we look at the brain, and there's a lot of papers about the triune brain, which is the reptilian brain, and then an emotional brain, and on top of that, the rational brain. This is a myth. The limbic system, which is basically emotions which are there, are predictive and they're not reactive. The brain did not evolve for rationality, but it evolved for allostasis, which is basically an evolutionary goal. And moral judgments, as their mental state, they're constructions. So this is basically the work of Lisa Barrett, who actually states that emotions are not inherent in our minds, but they are constructed from our affects. And this is very important. These kind of things are actually constructed, given the situation. And there's also the psychological view. Psychological view, there are a lot of moral psychology. They actually say we also have an agent, we have an action, and we have a patient who's done harm by this agent through a certain action. So that matches actually quite well with the philosophical view. We're also looking at an agent doing an action to a certain, with that certain consequences. So augmented utilitarianism, actually, basically what it tries to do is it tries to formalize a utility function which captures virtue ethics, deontological ethics, and consequential ethics in one utility function. So it's not to be confused with classical utilitarianism, because that only or primarily looks at consequences. And it must have encode these dyadic information from moral psychology. And we also have to use science and technology to do some kind of debiasing of our moral, because there's also a lot of work on our biases and the way we think and all kind of biases we have. We should also debias and use technology for that, to look at the future, and use technology like virtual reality to really try to help us fill in those what we actually value most now and in the future. And also the other thing is, which is also a basic problem in the philosophical domain, is maybe some of you heard already about that, a lot of debate about moral uncertainty, and that it can never be really defined. We actually wrote papers in which we said this is a misconception, because this has to do with classical utilitarianism. If you go to the first person perspective, and if you say that actually society itself, and it's up to the society itself, and this is the current society we are living in now, those have to formulate that, then this whole discussion about moral uncertainty and impossibility theorems vaporizes. So this is a way you could see at looking at virtual reality. So actually you could simulate the future and see, and this is already being done, by the way, for example, for autonomous vehicles, in which people then sit in virtual reality in an autonomous vehicle and then really think about what actually is good behavior. So this is already a much better approach than asking people, for example, what do you think of an autonomous vehicle? So you simply put them in there, let them experience it, and then ask about them what they think about it. So this is what you understand, because the ethical goal functions should be formulated finally by society, or as the representative of society, some kind of governmental, the law, the party who makes the law, actually. And the party who actually develops advanced artificial intelligence can then actually optimize on this ethical goal function. So actually you can say, okay, this is what we want from society. So all developers, for example, developing autonomous vehicles, you develop such vehicles as they are optimizing on these ethical goal functions. And then actually you could even rate the different artificial intelligence according to what extent they actually approach this optimal ethical goal of society. This is a very complicated picture. It is basically representing a social technological feedback loop. So what it actually says, it's we have this artificial, suppose we take an autonomous vehicle. This is, I think, a good example in which there are a lot of debate and a lot of discussions about it. So there's a developer who actually has an autonomous vehicle. Then it is actually can be introduced in society, but that is quite dangerous. So we could also introduce it in a virtual environment and let people experience this type of autonomous vehicle and what they think about it. Not only the people who are in the vehicle, but also the people outside seeing this behavior or on the streets. So everybody can actually then somehow understand what the behavior of this vehicle is what according to society. And then we could even adjust this ethical goal function. Suppose we'd say, no, this is not a good behavior. Then actually we have the control in these ethical goal functions to change the behavior of the autonomous vehicle. And then actually that could all continuously be updated. So this is also an interesting way to do error correction, because then you can say, okay, we simply try something, and we could even try it virtual reality. And then in the end, you could actually then say, well, it was not a good idea. We experienced this, but it was not a nice experience. And this was actually not, and everybody can even debate about it, whether that behavior was good or not good. And then, but you have a mathematical control then. You can say, well, we have to adjust this and this parameters because change the behavior. And also the artificial intelligence in principle can explain to the judge, for example, why it behaved in a certain way. Because it is actually can be seen where it was optimizing on and why it was optimizing on this particular thing compared to another thing. What I forgot to mention is, and this is very important, is that in all these discussions, there is a lot of discussions about, okay, it should be trustworthy, it should be ethical, it should be safe, it should be privacy, and these kind of things. In the end, we know, and this is very clear as in the moral machine for MIT and these kind of things, is that we finally come always up to the point in which we cannot comply to all the fundamental rights even. So at a certain point, we have to either say we do not allow any type of autonomy in society or in other kind of artificial intelligence when fundamental rights are, but then actually we can never go to level 5 autonomous vehicles, which would be very nice because that would save a lot of lives and those kind of things. So we run up to the point in which we have to accept that we have these trolley problems, that we need somehow to formalize what type of behavior we as a society, and this is actually what MIT and the moral machine and the moral lab are actually doing. So they're actually searching for those points in which we have multiple fundamental rights even, but we still have to make a decision. So you need to really approach this, and you need to somehow, it's not a philosophical discussion. It's simply what we as a society think is, in the end, the best behavior in very complicated and compromising situations. And we can use virtual reality to deal with that. So this is the mathematical thing. I skipped that because that is actually not simply that there are different ways in which you could, in a mathematical form, actually capture all the kind of needs that people do not really need even to agree on all these kind of things. Simply, you could also simply for certain things say, okay, these people think this is important, these people think this is so important. So you can weigh the different perspectives and come to some kind of a compromise in a very natural way, because it's not a conflict, actually. It's simply weighting different values. But in the end, this is a nice story, and I think this is very interesting, and it is also, we do not see that many complications, except from the fact that a lot of people, the first step is to really separate the goal from the intelligence. I think this is a very important step. And in a lot of discussions, it's not done, which leads to a lot of confusion. But in the end, I have to warn you, there is a safety paradox. So what I described just now is actually about artificial intelligence that can be controlled. Even very advanced, even intelligence which is much more intelligent than we are, can in principle be controlled by in this type of way. And it reflects actually moral intuition of society. But in the future, we could also have a conscious, effective understanding, which means, and this is the other thing of AI safety, what we call value alignment. This is actually that an artificial intelligence has a human-like understanding of what actually morality is, and it has its own affection on this type of morality. This would be nice. I mean, this is basically what people feel. We need to control it, and it need to be value aligned. But now we understand that these type of requirements cannot be both at the same time be fulfilled, because this second type of future AI, which is in principle, there's no fundamental scientific reason now why this is not possible. And so we actually have to make a choice in the future. We wrote a paper about this for the Artificial General Intelligence conference for this year, which is error correction for AI safety, in which you introduce this paradox and say, well, either we have to choose for a type of AI which we can control, even if this is super intelligent, or we have to choose for an AI which can be value aligned with us, so which we can actually feels our our ethics, to say it in that way. And we discuss that, and we say that for both types of AI, there are different types of safety problems. For both types of advanced AI, there are severe safety problems. But we can distinguish and differentiate now and identify which type of safety problems we have for both types of AI. So this was a lot, maybe, and also quite difficult, but this is how I want to conclude my presentation.
Thank you very much, Leon. It's extremely interesting and extremely urgent that we have this kind of discussions, I would say. And I do believe that you strike at the core of moral programming this way. So thank you very much for that. There are some questions from the audience. Are you comfortable in addressing shall I address a couple of questions?
Yeah, do you? Yeah.
All right. So first of all, the result of your poll, maybe you're interested in that, is you asked the question, do you think that future artificial intelligent agents will be able to make better ethical decisions than humans? We have 30 votes, and 43% says yes, and 57% would say no. So that's quite balanced, so to say. What is your first response to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is, it's more or less what I expected. Yes. This is, of course, where a lot of conflict in the discussion is often about, that certain people are very fundamental in this discussion. And actually, if you dive deeper into that, then you can see, of course, in the current AI, a lot is missing. But if you purely approach it from a scientific perspective, it is also quite well known what is missing in current AI. And the problem about this is that, from my perspective, a lot of people do not really have if you're looking deep into artificial intelligence, you, of course, also come to the problem that you also should have a scientific view of human intelligence and human emotions and human. So this is actually... I have a lot of discussions internationally about autonomous weapon systems, and then all these things all come about. And I have had so many times in which I was in a situation with all kinds of experts from different domains. And these people are have scientific expertise in their domain. But when it comes to other domains, they usually fill in their own personal view about these things and not the scientific arguments or scientific perspective. And this makes these discussions extremely difficult. So this is why we needed to take a total approach. And this is what I listed in the beginning. It was just, okay, let's take all those views then and try to make sense of all those different views at the same time.
So do I understand you correctly? When you ask a question like this, you seem to suppose that there is such a thing as absolutism in ethics, because if you ask the question, can human beings take better or worse decisions than artificial intelligence, there seems to be some kind of a, Archimedean point with which you can compare. Yes.
Okay. So this is actually in the philosophical domain. So this is where I started. There you have these impossibility theorems and saying it's moral uncertainty. So from the philosophical perspective, it cannot be done. And it's even discussed in Dutch Parliament recently about these kind of evaluations. This is also popular in artificial intelligence domain, by the way. But we wrote a paper in which we said, this is nice and fine, but this is not something which should and can absolutely be decided. Let's take a practical approach and simply say, well, let's find out what we as a society at the current moment want and try then to avoid all these type of biases and misunderstandings such that we finally come to some kind of a conclusion. And then the impossibility theorems from the philosophical domain evaporate. Actually, it's not. So it doesn't matter. It's simply what we have to do now is capture what we at the current moment think and want, and then in the socio-technological feedback loop, try to optimize on that. So we experience that then, and they say, oh, that was not such a good idea. So we actually learn also from this socio-technological feedback loop what actually we should want.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, the word better has different meanings here.
Yes. So the word better, so to avoid the problem, we simply say better is simply what we as a society think it is.
I see. So because I wanted to show you this is a very interesting book, and one of the contributing authors of that is called Selma Brinkshort, and he actually pleads that human beings will always be able to take better ethical decisions compared to artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence can only be flat moral actors, especially because they can undertake ethical decisions that are beyond their duty or that are beyond whatever ethics dictates them to do. Would you agree with that?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Because it's so there are I think a lot of the problems come from the view people have on artificial intelligence. So I also identify different type of views people have on artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And so my view, of course, is from the artificial general intelligence and superintelligence and all these kind of things, the very advanced intelligence in which there is at the moment, and that is currently agreed upon, no scientific argument why an artificial entity could not be capable, in principle, of doing anything a human being could do. Because we are also, from a scientific perspective, also physical entities. And it doesn't matter what the substrate of this physical entity is. If we need biology, we use biology. So from a scientific perspective, there is no argument.
Fair enough. Let's see, we have time for one more question. I just pick one. To be honest, there are a lot of questions, actually. Might there be challenges with moral biases by the people who model what society wants into the feedback loop? This is a question addressed by Marco Zondervan.
Very good question. Yes, very, very good question. So we thought about how to start the feedback loop. So you need to start somewhere, because you need to already have a utility function at the beginning to optimize on. So as a developer, you need already to have some kind of a formulation of what society should want to develop something. So the question then is, how do you start it? Because it's impossible to ask the whole society, and by the way, how do you organize it? Because first you have to have a whole process in which you are able, people even understand what they have to do. So how do you start it? And that is a very difficult and interesting and intriguing question even. So it is, you could of course say, okay, I think the best thing to start is simply from this perspective of understanding all these different type of views, and from all these different type of views, try as a scientist to think about what society probably should want now. Then you can make an artificial intelligence based on that, and then you can let people experience this type of artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much. Leon, is there any? I know that you wrote a very interesting article about artificial weapons, for instance. Is there some place online where we can find more about you?
Yeah, I mean, on Google Scholar, you can find the last 12, 15 papers I wrote on this subject, including the one on this governance of autonomy in military situations. Yes.
I see.
Google Scholar, for example, and you can also find there most of the papers there. Yes. Yeah.
Fair enough. And I think, I know some of our students are also watching. We have through beep.nu, we also have access to those kind of papers. I'm a big fan of this work, so I would recommend to read it. It's very interesting.
Yes, and the other thing is, I did most of the work, or all the work actually, basically, with Nadisha Marie-Aliman, who was a PhD student at the University of Utrecht, and her PhD thesis, which also has comments on all these papers, because the latest views are, again, changing all the time.
Yeah.
Her thesis will be very soon available. So this
let
is
me
very
know.
important.
Let me know.
In which all this work is put together, even. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Leon, thank you very much for your valuable contribution in the symposium. I really appreciate you being here. And I'll switch to Dutch now.